Nothing has grown in this village for 3 years. 6 people died last month. 2 of them were children. And now a stranger, on a dead field, has just pulled a glowing green sprout out of bare gray earth. Han Noa opens his eyes and tastes ash. He pushes himself up on arms that are not his own. Thinner, younger, scarred across the palms. The body he wears is starving, and the land around him is starving with it. Gray fields run to the horizon. Not a weed, not a blade of grass. He drives his fingers into the ground and finds nothing. No moisture, no worms, no life at all. He has read soil his whole life, and this soil tells him one thing: it is dead. Then, blue light flickers at the edge of his sight. Farmer system activated. Local soil. Monodepletion critical. Zero growth capacity. The words rearrange as if they feel his confusion. Quest. Feed the starving. Plant your first monocrop on dead soil. He reaches to touch the text, and his fingers pass straight through. He gets to his feet. His legs nearly buckle. 300 paces off, a cluster of sagging roofs leans into the dust. A village, if you can still call it that. He walks toward it, and every step kicks up gray powder that hangs in the dead air. He counts 40 houses, and in every one, the same story. A man slumped against a wall who opens one eye and looks at him, without curiosity, without hope, without anything at all. 2 children on a bare floor staring at an empty bowl between them. No chickens, no dogs, no fields to tend. Just the slow, transparent death of a place where the earth gave up. The system pulses across his vision. Mana depletion, 97%. He does not know what mana is. He does not know whose body this is or what happened to the man who wore it before him. But he knows hunger when he sees it, and he knows how to farm. That is enough. He walks back to the nearest dead field. He drops to his knees. He presses both palms into the gray earth and wills the thing to answer. Grow. Warmth spreads from his hands like water sinking into sand. 1 meter. 2. 3. The ground darkens a single shade as if something ancient stirs awake far below. A seed forms in his palm. Small, round, glowing pale green like a heartbeat. He digs a hole with his fingers. He sets the seed and covers it, and presses the soil down the way his grandfather taught him when he was 4. Firm, but not tight. Give it room to breathe. For a moment, nothing. Then the earth cracks. A thread of green no thicker than a needle breaks the surface and glows against the gray. The first living thing this ground has made in years. Behind him, someone gasps. A young woman stands at the edge of the field with a clay jug in her hands. Thin like everyone here. Hard eyes that have buried too many people too young. The jug slips from her fingers and hits the dirt, and she does not even notice. She walks forward as if something stronger than her legs is pulling her. She drops beside the sprout. She reaches out and stops just short of touching it. Then she looks at him, and her voice shakes like wire pulled too tight. She says it is impossible. She says nothing has grown in Norok for 3 years. She says even the guild mages cannot raise a single stalk from this soil. She says 6 people died last month, and 2 of them were children. She says her name is Lien, and she is the elder's daughter. And she says if this is a trick, she will kill him herself, because these people cannot survive another false hope. He looks at the fury in her eyes, and understands it is not aimed at him. It is aimed at a world that kept taking. He tells her his name. He tells her he is a farmer. He tells her he needs tools and water and every dead field around the village because by morning he plants more. The trembling stops. Something moves behind her eyes that is not hope yet, but stands right next to it. She tells him to follow her. He does not look back. But he knows the sprout is there, glowing in the dead field. And the system pulses once more. Quest progress. 1 of 40 households fed. He has a long way to go. But the first seed is in the ground. And in his experience, that is always the hardest part. Lien brought him to her father. The village elder sat in a chair that was too large for his shrunken frame, inside the meeting hall Noah had seen earlier. His name was Doran. He was maybe 50 years old, but he looked 70. His skin hung from his face like cloth draped over a frame of sticks. His eyes had the clouded quality of a man whose body was failing him in ways he had stopped counting. Lien told him what she had seen. A sprout. A glowing manna grain sprout on the eastern field where nothing had grown since the second year of the withering. Doran looked at Noa for a long time. He did not speak. Then he said that 3 seasons ago, a traveling mage had come to Norok, claiming he could restore mana to the soil for a price. The village had paid everything they had, every coin, every stored grain, every piece of metal they could melt down. The mage had waved his staff over the fields and chanted and taken their payment and left. Nothing grew. 2 families had starved to death that winter because of the food they had given up for the fraud. Doran said this without anger. He said it with the flatness of a man who had used up all his anger years ago and had nothing left but the recitation of facts. He asked Noa what his price was. Noa said he had no price. He said he was a farmer, and there was dead soil and hungry people, and that was reason enough. Doran stared at him. Then he looked at Lien. She nodded once. Something passed between father and daughter, a silent conversation built on years of shared grief. Doran told Noa he could have the eastern field. He said there were 3 hoes in the storage shed and 1 shovel with a cracked handle. He said the well still held water, though it tasted of chalk and carried no mana. He said that if Noa needed hands, there were 30 adults in the village still capable of standing, though not for long at a stretch. And he said that if this was a lie, he would not need Lien to kill him, because the village would do it together. Noa accepted the terms. He started that evening. The sun was dropping toward the horizon and painting the dead landscape in shades of gray and amber. Noa stood at the edge of the eastern field and opened his system interface. The blue glow expanded into a translucent panel only he could see. Soil restoration level 1. Range 3-meter radius per application. Cooldown 1 hour. Available seeds basic mana grain times 20. He did the math. The eastern field was roughly 200 paces long and 100 paces wide. At 3 meters per restoration pulse, with an hour cooldown, he could restore maybe a tenth of it before he collapsed from exhaustion. This body had not eaten properly in weeks. He could feel his muscles trembling just from the walk through the village. He needed to be strategic. He picked the section of field closest to the irrigation ditch. Even though the ditch was dry, the channels were still intact. If he could find water, he could direct it. He knelt and pressed his palms to the earth. The warmth flowed out again. 3 meters of dead gray soil shifted to a darker shade. Not alive yet, not truly, but no longer completely dead. Something between death and dormancy. He planted 4 seeds in the restored patch, spaced them the way you would space grain, far enough apart that the roots would not compete, close enough that the leaf canopy would shade the soil and reduce moisture loss. Basic agronomy. The kind of thing he had learned before he could read. 4 pale green glows sank into the earth, and he waited. One by one the hairline cracks appeared. One by one the tiny luminous threads pushed through. 4 sprouts. They stood in the dead field like candles in a dark room. He moved 3 meters to the right and pressed his palms down again. Waited for the cooldown. Restored another patch. Planted 4 more seeds. 4 more sprouts. The system chimed softly. Soil restoration experience gained. 8 of 20 seeds planted. By the time full dark had fallen, Noa had restored 6 patches and planted all 20 seeds. 20 glowing sprouts in a line across the eastern field. His arms shook. His vision blurred at the edges. This body was running on nothing. He sat in the dirt between his planted rows and breathed. The sprouts gave off just enough light to see by. A faint green luminescence that turned the gray soil into something almost beautiful. He realized he was smiling. He could not help it. Even in the worst of circumstances, there was something in watching seeds take root that made the world feel less broken. A footstep behind him. Lien. She carried a wooden bowl and set it down beside him without a word. Inside was a thin broth with a few pieces of root floating in it. It smelled like boiled bark. She said it was all they had. He picked up the bowl and drank. It was terrible. The roots were tasteless and fibrous, and the broth was mostly water. But it was warm, and his body seized on it with a desperate gratitude that told him this was the first food it had received in at least 2 days. Lien sat down next to him. She was looking at the sprouts, 20 points of green light in the darkness. She said nothing for a long time. Then she said that her mother had died in the first year of the withering, a fever that the healers could not treat because they had no mana herbs. She said that her younger brother had left for the capital 2 years ago looking for work, and they had not heard from him since. She said that Doran, her father, had been a strong man once, a man who could carry a sack of grain on each shoulder and laugh while doing it. Now he could barely stand. She said these things not for sympathy. She said them so Noa would understand what was at stake, what it meant for these 20 sprouts to be glowing in the dark. He listened. When she was done, he told her that 3 days from now, the first grain would be ready to harvest. He told her that 20 plants would yield enough to feed perhaps 4 families for a week. He told her that it was not enough, not nearly, but it was a start. And he told her that the soil could be restored further, that each time he treated a patch, the dead earth came back a little more, that with time and work, the field could live again. She asked how he knew this. He said that he had been a farmer his whole life. She looked at his scarred hands, the hands of the body he wore. She said that the man those hands belonged to had been a tenant laborer named Tal, who worked the fields of a minor lord 20 leagues east of here. She said Tal had come to Norok 8 months ago, half dead from walking, and had collapsed in the village square. They had fed him what little they had, because that was what you did in Norok. She said he had been quiet and useless and thin and had died 3 days ago. Just stopped breathing in his sleep. She looked at Noa, sitting in Tal's body, surrounded by impossible glowing crops, and she said that she did not know what he was, but she knew he was not Tal. Noa met her eyes. He considered lying. He decided not to. He told her she was right. He said that he did not fully understand it himself, but that the man who had been Tal was gone, and he was here instead. He said that where he came from, he had been a farmer too, a real one. He said that was all he could offer. Lien was silent for a while. Then she said that it did not matter who he had been. What mattered was that the sprouts were real. She stood up and took the empty bowl and walked back toward the village. Noa watched her go. Then he turned back to his 20 sprouts and began planning the next day's work. He slept in the field that night, not by choice, but because his legs would not carry him back to the village. He curled up on the restored soil between 2 rows of manna grain, and it was warmer than the dead earth around it. Not much, but enough to notice. The sprouts glowed softly above him, like a constellation brought down to earth. He closed his eyes, and the system displayed his status. Host condition: severe malnutrition. Stamina: 12%. Mana affinity: dormant. Soil restoration charges: 0 of 6. Recharging. Next seed stock available at quest milestone. Feed 10 households. He needed to feed 10 households to unlock more seeds. He had 20 plants that would feed 4. The math was tight. But tight math was the story of every farm he had ever worked. You stretched what you had. You planned 2 seasons ahead. You wasted nothing. Dawn came gray and cold. Noa opened his eyes to find the sprouts had grown overnight. They were no longer threads. Each one stood 4 inches tall, with a pair of luminous leaves unfurled. Growing fast. Faster than any grain he had ever seen. The system said 3 days to harvest. At this rate, he believed it. He pulled himself upright and assessed. His body was weak, but functional. The broth from last night had given him just enough to move. He needed to maximize today. More soil restoration, better irrigation. And he needed to talk to the villagers about what came next. He found Lien already awake and standing at the edge of the field, staring at the overnight growth. She was not alone. An old man with a bent back and sharp eyes stood beside her, leaning on a stick. 2 women wrapped in faded shawls stood behind them. A boy of maybe 12 crouched at the field's edge with his mouth open. The word had spread. Lien told Noah that half the village wanted to see the sprouts, and the other half refused to come because they did not want to see another lie. He addressed the ones who had come. He told them he needed their help. He needed the irrigation ditch cleared of debris and dust. He needed water carried from the well in every container they could find. He needed the cracked hoe handles repaired. He needed someone to find him any scrap of organic material in the village. Food waste, wood ash, bone fragments, anything that had once been alive. They stared at him. The old man with the stick asked why he needed garbage. Noah said it was not garbage. It was the beginning of compost. The old man stared at him as if he had spoken a holy word in a gutter dialect. But Lien stepped forward and told them to do what the farmer said. And they did. Not because they believed in him, because Lien believed in him. And Lien had been the one holding this village together for 3 years while her father faded and their people died one by one. If she said move, they moved. By midday, the irrigation ditch was cleared for 30 paces. Water from the well trickled through it in a thin stream. It was chalky and mineral and manna dead as Doran had warned. But it was water, and water was life even without manna. Noah directed it to his planted rows with small channels dug by hand. The sprouts drank. He could see them respond. The leaves tilted toward the moisture. The glow brightened a fraction. He restored 2 more patches of soil that afternoon. His cool-down timer ticked faithfully, 1 hour between each pulse. He planted no new seeds because he had none left, but he prepared the restored earth, loosened it with the cracked hoe, mixed in the first handful of crude compost the villagers had gathered, wood ash and fish bones and the powdered remains of dead roots. It was pitiful by any standard of agriculture he knew, but the principle was sound. Return to the soil what you take from it. Even manna soil had to follow that rule. He was certain of it. The system seemed to agree. A notification pulsed. Soil quality improving. Organic amendment detected. Restoration efficiency plus 4%. 4%. Small, but compounding. Every cycle of restoration would go a little further. Every handful of compost would push the dead earth a little closer to life. This was how you rebuilt a farm. Not in a single miracle, in 1,000 small acts of patience. On the 3rd morning, the manna grain was ready. Noah had watched it grow hour by hour, from 4-inch sprouts to knee-high stalks in 2 days. The grain heads formed on the 2nd evening, fat clusters of luminous kernels that glowed with a steady green-gold light visible from the village. People came to stand at the edge of the field and watch. Nobody spoke. They just watched the light. Some of them cried. Noah harvested at dawn. He had no sickle, so he used the sharpened knife the village lent him. Each stalk came away from the soil with a soft resistance, like cutting through warm bread. The grain heads were heavy, heavier than any wheat or rice he had ever held. Each kernel pulsed with that faint glow, and when he brought a handful close to his face, he felt something. A warmth that entered through his skin and sank deeper than muscle, deeper than bone, into something he had no name for. The system named it for him. Mana absorption detected. Host mana reserves, 0.3%. Just from touching it. He gathered the harvest into the cleanest cloth the village could provide. 20 plants yielded enough grain to fill 4 large sacks. Each sack glowed faintly through the fabric. He carried them to the meeting hall. His arms shook under the weight, but he did not stop. Lien walked beside him. She had not slept. He could see it in the shadows under her eyes. She had been guarding the field all night. He had not asked her to. He set the sacks down in the center of the hall, and Dorn came forward in his chair. The old man reached into the nearest sack with trembling fingers and pulled out a handful of manna grain. The glow reflected off his sunken face. He brought a single kernel to his lips and bit down. His eyes closed. Something moved across his face. Not an expression Noah could name. It was beyond expression. It was a man tasting life after years of dying by degrees. Doran chewed, swallowed, sat still for a long moment. Then he opened his eyes and they were wet, and he said that he could feel it. The manna. Faint, but real. Moving through his body like warmth from a fire he had forgotten existed. He looked at Noah and said nothing. He did not need to. They distributed the grain that morning. Lien organized it with a precision that told Noah she had been managing scarcity for years. The sickest first, then the children, then the elderly, then everyone else. 4 sacks was not much for 40 households, but manna grain was different from ordinary food. A single handful left a person full in a way that went beyond the stomach. The manna in the grain filled something deeper, the hollowness that everyone in Norok carried, that absence Noah had felt in the air since he arrived. He watched a woman feed a handful of glowing kernels to her 2 children, the ones he had seen staring at the empty bowl on his first day. They chewed slowly. Then the older one looked up at his mother and said that his chest was warm. The woman pulled both children against her and held them, and her shoulders shook. Noah turned away. He had work to do. Quest complete. Feed the starving. Reward. Seed stock expanded. New seeds unlocked. Manna root vegetable. Growth time, 5 days. Higher caloric yield. Soil restoration level 2 unlocked. Range, 5-meter radius. Cooldown, 45 minutes. He felt the system expand inside him, like a door opening into a larger room. New seeds appeared in his inventory. 60 manna grain, 20 manna root vegetables. The restoration range had grown, and the cooldown had shortened. The math changed immediately. 5 meters instead of 3. 45 minutes instead of 60. He could cover more ground faster, and root vegetables meant caloric density, starch, substance, something that would keep people on their feet for a full day of labor. He went back to the field. The next 5 days were the hardest work of either of his lives. He restored soil from dawn until his body gave out, 5 meters at a time, 45 minutes between pulses. He planted in rotating blocks, manna grain on the restored patches closest to the irrigation ditch where water access was best, root vegetables on the slightly drier patches further out, where deep taproots could seek their own moisture. He taught Lien about spacing, and she organized the villagers into planting crews. Not everyone could kneel. Some were too weak. But those who could not kneel carried water. Those who could not carry water sorted compost materials. Those who could not sort sat at the edge of the field and watched. And their watching was its own kind of contribution, because it meant they had not given up. On the second day, the boy who had crouched at the field's edge with his mouth open appeared at Noah's side with a question. His name was Miru, and he was 12. And he wanted to know why Noah planted the seeds at different depths. Noah explained that shallow roots spread wide for moisture, while deep roots anchored the plant and sought nutrients below the surface. Different depths meant different root architectures, and that meant the plants would not compete for the same resources. Miru listened with an intensity that Noah recognized. It was the look of a mind that wanted to understand how things worked. He told Miru to watch the root vegetables when they sprouted, to notice how the leaves were different from the grain, wider, designed to catch every bit of light, a different strategy for a different purpose. Miru nodded, and from that day forward, he was Noah's shadow, following him through the rows, asking questions, learning. On the 4th day, the first manna root vegetables broke the surface. They were not luminous like the grain. Instead, they pushed the soil upward in small mounds that radiated heat. When Noah pressed his hand to the earth above one, he could feel the manna pulsing below like a buried heartbeat. The villagers gathered to watch again. This time, more of them came. The ones who had refused before. The ones who had not wanted to see another lie. They stood at the field's edge and looked at the rows of glowing grain and the heaving mounds of root vegetables and the dark restored soil that stood in sharp contrast to the dead gray earth surrounding it. One of them, a heavy-set man named Barren, who Lien had told Noah was the village's most vocal skeptic, walked onto the field without permission. He knelt beside a manna grain stalk and touched the soil around its base. He held his hand there for a long time. Then he stood up and walked to Noah and said that the earth was warm. Noah said yes. Barren said that warm earth had not existed in Norok since before the Withering. Noah said he knew. Barren looked at him with an expression that was not quite trust, but was the closest thing to it that a man who had been betrayed by hope could manage. He asked Noah what he needed. Noah said he needed more hands for the irrigation channels. Barren nodded and walked away, and came back an hour later with 6 people and 3 shovels. By the end of the 5th day, the eastern field looked like a different world. Where there had been nothing but cracked gray death, there was now a patchwork of dark restored soil studded with rows of luminous grain and swelling root vegetables. The irrigation channels carried water to every planted section. Crude compost piles stood at the field's edge. Noah had taught the villagers to save every scrap of organic waste. Fish bones, wood ash, the husks from the first manna grain harvest, even human waste properly composted. They had looked at him with horror at that last suggestion, and he had explained that in the place he came from, farmers had been doing it for thousands of years. It was not pleasant, but it worked. The system confirmed it. Organic amendment quality, moderate. Soil restoration efficiency, plus 11%. The numbers were climbing. Each cycle built on the last. The restored soil held more manna with each treatment. The plants grew stronger. The yields increased. It was a feedback loop. The same principle that drove every successful farm Noah had ever known. Health begets health. Life begets life. You pour into the soil, and the soil pours back. Quest update. Feed 10 households. Progress. 10 of 10. Reward. Seed stock expanded. New seeds unlocked. Manna herb, basic healing variety. Growth time, 7 days. Properties. Accelerates wound healing. Treats minor illness. Restores low-level mana depletion. Healing herbs. Noah stared at the notification. In a world where mana depletion meant healers could not heal, and the sick simply died, this was not just agriculture. This was medicine. He thought of Doran in his oversized chair, the clouded eyes, the skin hanging off his frame. He thought of the children with their brittle hair and their empty patience. He thought of all the people Lien had told him about, the ones who died because there were no mana herbs left in the kingdom. He planted the first healing herb seeds that evening, in a dedicated patch of the best restored soil he had. The seeds were different from the grain, smaller, darker. They did not glow green, but gave off a faint silver luminescence when he placed them in the earth. He watered them carefully, covered them with a thin layer of composted material, spoke to them under his breath the way he had always spoken to his plants. Not because he believed they could hear him, but because the act of speaking forced him to slow down and pay attention, to notice the soil moisture, the seed depth, the spacing, the small details that meant the difference between a good crop and a great one. Miru appeared beside him and asked what the silver seeds were. Noah told him they were healing herbs. Miru asked if they could heal his grandmother, who had been coughing blood for 2 months. Noah looked at the boy and said he did not know, but he would try. Miru nodded. He sat down next to the planted row and did not move until Lien came to take him home for the night. The healing herbs sprouted on the 3rd day, silver-green leaves that unfurled in pairs and released a scent like rain on clean earth. Noah had never smelled anything like it. The aroma carried something beyond chemistry. When he breathed it in, his persistent headache faded. The ache in his overworked shoulders loosened. The fatigue that clung to his bones like wet cloth lifted just enough for him to notice its absence. The villagers noticed, too. People who walked past the herb patch straightened their backs without realizing it. Coughs quieted. A woman with a swollen, infected hand held it over the growing herbs and said the throbbing had stopped. The herbs were not ready for harvest yet, but their mere proximity was doing something. Manna bleeding into the air. Noah filed that information away. In his world, plants affected their environment through oxygen production and volatile compounds and root exudates. Here they did it through manna. Different mechanism, same principle. Living things changed the world around them simply by being alive. On the 7th morning, he harvested the first batch. 20 herb plants yielded a basket of silver-green leaves and thick aromatic stems. Lien carried them to the meeting hall where the sickest villagers had been gathered. 5 people too weak to walk on their own. Doran among them. The elder's condition had worsened despite the manna grain. His cough had deepened into something wet and rattling, and his skin had taken on a gray undertone that Noah did not like. Noah did not know the medicine of this world. He did not know dosages or preparations or which part of the herb to use, but the system guided him. Basic preparation: crush leaves. Apply to wound or brew in hot water for internal ailment. Dosage: 1 leaf per treatment. Maximum 3 treatments per day. Simple. Almost too simple. He crushed leaves with the flat of a knife and brewed them in hot water. The liquid turned silver and steamed with that same rain scent. He gave the first cup to Doran. The old man drank. His eyes widened. Color came into his face like ink spreading through water, a visible tide of warmth pushing back the gray. He coughed once, twice. Then he coughed up something dark and thick that had clearly been sitting in his lungs for weeks. He spat it into a rag and breathed. A real breath, deep and full and clear. He looked at the cup in his hands and then at Noa, and he said that he had forgotten what it felt like. What felt like? Noa asked. Doran said, life. The next 4 patients responded in kind. The woman with the infected hand drank the tea, and within an hour the swelling had halved. A man with a leg wound that had refused to close for months found it knitting before his eyes. An elderly woman who had been blind in one eye opened it and saw her daughter's face for the first time in 2 years. But it was Miru's grandmother who broke Noa's composure. The old woman had been carried to the hall on a makeshift stretcher. She was barely conscious, blood on her lips, the rattling breath of lungs that were losing a fight. Miru sat beside her, holding her hand with an expression of forced calm that no 12-year-old should have to wear. Noa brewed the tea and held the cup to her lips. She could barely swallow. 3 sips. 4. Her eyes fluttered. The rattling eased, then stopped. For one terrible moment, Noa thought she had died. Then she breathed, clean and quiet and steady. She opened her eyes and looked at Miru and said his name. The boy's forced calm shattered. He buried his face in her blanket and his thin shoulders heaved. Noa walked outside. He stood behind the meeting hall and pressed his forehead against the mud wall and closed his eyes. In his old life, he had grown soybeans and rice and vegetables and taken them to market and never seen the faces of the people who ate them. Here, the faces were right in front of him. Every grain he grew went directly from his hand to a specific mouth. Every herb he harvested healed a specific person. The distance between farmer and table had been reduced to 0, and it was overwhelming in a way he had not expected. He breathed until his hands stopped shaking. Then he went back to work. The healing herbs changed Norak more than the food had. Food kept people alive. Healing gave them back the strength to live. Within days, the village was transformed. People who had been sitting against walls waiting to die were on their feet. Coughs vanished. Wounds closed. The gray pallor that hung over every face like a mask began to recede. Doran walked to the field under his own power and stood there for an hour, watching the crops grow with tears on his weathered cheeks. The children ran. Noa had not seen a single child run since he arrived, and now they chased each other between the planted rows, shrieking with an energy that seemed to physically hurt the adults who heard it, because they remembered when all the children had sounded like that. System notification: Village Vitality Index rising. Overall mana saturation: 4%. Quest issued: Expand the harvest. Restore 50% of available farmland. Reward: Intermediate mana crops unlocked. Soil restoration level 3. 50% of available farmland. Noa assessed. The eastern field was roughly a quarter of the total arable land around Norak. There were 3 more dead fields. South, west, north. All larger than the eastern field. All completely barren. He would need weeks to restore them at his current rate. He would need more hands, more water, more compost, more of everything. And he would need it soon, because the healing herbs and the mana grain had done something he had not anticipated. Word was spreading. It started with a single family, a man and a woman and 3 children who appeared at the edge of the village on the 9th day, gaunt and hollow-eyed and carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs. The man said they had come from a village called Ashfen, 2 days' walk to the east. Ashfen was dead. Everyone had left or died. They had heard a rumor. A rumor that in Norok the earth was alive again, that crops glowed in the fields, that the sick were healed. They had not believed it, but they had nowhere else to go, so they walked. Lien looked at Noah. He looked at the newcomers. He looked at his fields. The math was tight, but the math was always tight. He told Lien to feed them. She did. The next day, 2 more families arrived, then 4, then a group of 11 people from 3 different villages who had banded together on the road for safety. The road was dangerous. Monsters roamed the countryside. Without mana to power the barrier stones that once protected the highways, the creatures of the wild had reclaimed the spaces between settlements. These refugees had walked through monster territory with nothing but wooden staves and desperation. They had lost 2 people on the way. They stood at the edge of Norok and stared at the glowing fields with faces Noah would never forget. The look of people who had accepted death, finding life where they expected none. By the end of the 2nd week, 60 new people had come to Norok. The village had grown from 40 households to nearly 70. The strain was immediate. More mouths, more need, more sick and wounded. The mana grain harvest was continuous now. Noah planted and harvested in rotating cycles, one section ripening while another was freshly sown. A perpetual harvest. But even perpetual motion had limits. The restored soil could only support so many plants at once. He needed more land. He threw himself into the southern field, restoration pulse after restoration pulse, 5 meters at a time, 45 minutes between each one. His body had grown stronger on mana grain and healing herbs, but there was only so far flesh could go. He planted through the heat of the day and into the evening. He showed the new arrivals how to dig irrigation channels and prepare compost. Some of them had been farmers before the withering. Their hands remembered the work, even if their bodies were weak. Garen organized them into shifts: morning crew, afternoon crew, evening crew. The big skeptic had become the farm's most effective foreman. He drove people hard but fairly, and he made sure everyone ate and rested, and nobody worked themselves into the ground. Noah was grateful. He was not good at managing people. He was good at managing soil. Let someone else handle the humans. Lien handled the distribution. She kept a ledger scratched onto thin wooden boards. Who received what, how much grain was stored, how many herb doses remained, how many days until the next harvest. She had the mind of an accountant and the heart of someone who had watched people die for lack of exactly this kind of organization. She rationed with fierce precision, and no one argued with her because everyone knew she gave herself the smallest share. On the 14th day, Noah stood at the center of the eastern field and looked around him. The field was fully restored now, every inch of it dark and warm and alive with mana. Rows of luminous grain stretched from one end to the other. Root vegetables swelled beneath mounds of rich earth. Healing herbs grew in a dedicated section near the water source, their silver-green leaves filling the air with that clean rain scent. The southern field was a quarter restored and already showing its first sprouts. People moved through the rows with purpose, weeding, watering, harvesting, composting, working, living. The contrast was staggering. 2 weeks ago, this had been a graveyard with breathing corpses. Now it was a farm. A real working farm, with people who had remembered how to hope. And at the center of it all, 20 rows of mana grain, glowing gold-green in the afternoon sun, casting light on faces that had forgotten what light looked like. The woman arrived on the 15th day. She came from the west road, walking with the careful pace of someone used to measuring her own remaining strength. She was young, 22 perhaps. She wore a traveling cloak, faded to the color of dust, and carried a leather satchel strapped across her chest. Her boots were worn through at the soles. Her face was thin, but her eyes were different from the refugees. Not hollow, sharp, searching. She walked past the new arrivals camped at the village edge without stopping, past the meeting hall without glancing at it, straight to the eastern field. She stood at its border and went still. Noah was kneeling in the herb section, checking root development on the second planting when he felt someone watching him. He looked up. The woman stood 10 paces away, staring at the silver-green herbs with an expression he could not read. Her lips were pressed together. Her hands were clenched at her sides. She was trembling. Not from cold or fear or weakness, from something else. She walked into the herb section without asking permission, knelt beside the nearest plant, reached out and cupped a silver-green leaf between her fingers with the tenderness of someone greeting an old friend they thought they would never see again. She leaned close and breathed in the scent. Her eyes closed. A single tear ran down her left cheek, and she did not wipe it away. Then she opened her eyes and looked at Noa and asked how this was possible. She said that Felris herb had been extinct in the kingdom for 2 years. She said that the last known stocks had been bought by the capital guilds at 100 gold per leaf. She said that she had spent 8 months walking from province to province, searching for even a single living specimen, and found nothing but dead fields and dead hope. And here it was, a full patch, growing in soil that should have been barren. She asked who he was. Noa said he was a farmer. She stared at him. Then she laughed. It was a short, broken sound. She said that her name was Sarah. She said she was a healer, a wandering herbalist trained in the old ways of mana botany. She said she had left her home in the northern province when the last healing gardens withered and died. She had been walking south ever since, looking for the herbs that her craft depended on, the herbs that could save the people she had been trained to save. She had found nothing. Everywhere the same, dead soil, dead mana, dead plants. She had been ready to stop looking, and then 3 days ago, a merchant on the road had told her an insane story about a village where the earth glowed green. She had not believed it. She was here anyway. Noa invited her to sit. She did not sit. She crouched beside the herbs and began examining them with professional precision. She checked leaf texture, stem thickness, root crown diameter. She crushed a leaf between her fingers and smelled it and tasted the residue on her thumb. She pulled a small, battered notebook from her satchel and compared something written in it to the plant in front of her. Her hands moved with the confidence of deep expertise. Noa recognized it immediately. It was the same confidence he felt when he held soil in his hands, the certainty that comes from years of study made real by practice. She said the herbs were healthy, better than healthy. She said the mana concentration in the leaves was higher than any Felris she had seen, even before the withering. She said the plants were producing at a rate that should be impossible in fifth-year soil. She looked at the earth around the herb roots. She pressed her fingers into it. Her eyes widened. She said the soil was alive. She said she could feel mana in it. Not much, but present. She said that nowhere in the kingdom had she found soil with any measurable mana. Not in 2 years of walking. She looked at Noa and her professional composure cracked slightly. She asked him again how this was possible. He told her the truth, as much of it as he could. He said that he had a way of restoring mana to the soil. He said that the crops grew from seeds he could produce as long as the soil was prepared. He said that he did not fully understand the mechanism, but the results spoke for themselves. He did not mention the system. Not yet. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Then she said that she could help. She said that she knew more about mana herbs than anyone outside the Royal Academy. She knew preparation methods, dosages, combinations. She knew which herbs treated which ailments and how to maximize their healing properties. She said that what he was growing was raw material, powerful but crude. With her knowledge, she could turn his harvest into real medicine. Noa looked at her. He thought about the 5 sick people he had treated with simple crushed leaves and hot water. He thought about how much more could be done with actual expertise. He told her she was welcome to stay. She nodded once. Then she asked him to show her everything. He spent the rest of that day walking the fields with Sarah. She examined every crop, every patch of restored soil, every compost pile and irrigation channel. She asked questions that no one else in Norok would have thought to ask. She asked about the mana density gradient between restored and unrestored soil. She asked about root depth and whether the mana grain drew nutrients from the same soil layer as the healing herbs. She asked about cross-pollination risks and whether the proximity of different mana crops affected their individual properties. Noa answered what he could. Some of her questions he had already investigated himself. Others opened new lines of thinking. The mana density gradient was real and measurable. The restored soil lost mana concentration as you moved away from its center, suggesting that the restoration effect radiated outward and faded at the edges. Root depth varied by crop, exactly as he had planned. The grain was shallow-rooted, while the root vegetables went deep, and the herbs occupied a middle layer. 3 crops accessing 3 different soil strata, a natural vertical separation that minimized competition. Classic intercropping principles applied to manna agriculture. Sarah listened to this with growing intensity. She said that what he was describing was not just farming, it was systematic manna ecology. She said that the Royal Academy had theorized about integrated monocrop systems for decades, but no one had ever implemented one, because no one had the ability to restore dead soil. She said that most agricultural mages worked with soil that still had residual mana. They supplemented and enhanced. They did not create from nothing. What Noah was doing was fundamentally different. He was building a mana ecosystem from the ground up, layer by layer, crop by crop. She said it was the most important thing happening in the kingdom, and nobody knew about it. Noah told her that he preferred it that way. She looked at him and said that it would not last. She said that rumors traveled fast in hungry times. The refugees were proof, and refugees talked. Merchants talked. Eventually, the wrong ears would hear about a village where manna crops grew on dead soil in the 5th year of the Withering. And then the people who controlled what was left of the kingdom's mana supply would come. Not to help, to take. Noah said he knew. He said he would deal with that when it came. Sarah shook her head. She said he did not understand. She told him about the guilds. The magical guilds of Arkan had been powerful before the Withering. They controlled the trade in mana crops and mana products, potions, elixirs, enchanted goods. They operated mana farms staffed by agricultural mages. They supplied the kingdom's mage knights and healers and barrier maintainers. When the Withering began, they had more mana reserves than anyone else. As the soil died and the crops failed, the guild's stockpiles became the most valuable resource in the kingdom. They sold mana grain at 10 times its former price, then 50 times, then 100. They rationed healing herbs to the wealthy and the connected. They let common people die while they hoarded what remained. The guild in this region was run by a man named Graven, magistrate of the Eastern Regional Guild. Sarah said his name the way you say the name of a disease. She said Graven had bought every mana-producing field in the eastern provinces. Most of them were dead now, but the ones that still produced even a trickle were his. He taxed every mana crop transaction. He controlled which healers received herbs and which did not. He had let entire towns die when they could not pay his prices. And he would hear about Norok. Soon. Probably already had. Noah listened. He looked at his fields, the glowing grain, the silver herbs, the dark, warm soil that he had brought back from death with his own hands. He thought about Graven coming here with guild mages at his back, demanding that the harvest belonged to him. He thought about Doran's story of the fraudulent mage who had taken everything the village had. Different predator, same principle. Take from those who cannot fight back. He clenched his fists. The soil under his feet was warm and alive, and it was his. Not because he owned it, because he had made it. Because he had knelt in dead earth and poured himself into it, and it had answered him. No guild magistrate was going to take that. He told Sarah that he needed to grow faster. She said that was the right instinct, but the wrong approach. Growing faster meant nothing if someone could simply walk in and claim the harvest. He needed something more than crops. He needed protection. And in Arkan, protection meant one thing: mage knights. As if summoned by the word, a commotion rose from the western edge of the village. Shouts, the sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Noah and Sarah ran toward the noise. A crowd had gathered around a figure collapsed in the road, a woman in battered armor. The armor had once been fine. Noah could see the remnants of engravings and a crest on the breastplate that might have been elegant before it was dented and scratched beyond recognition. A sword lay in the dirt beside her. The woman herself was face down and not moving. Lien was already there. She knelt and rolled the armored woman onto her back. The face beneath was young, mid-20s, strong-jawed, a scar running from her left temple to her chin. Her eyes were closed, and her skin had that gray undertone that Noah now recognized as severe mana depletion. She was alive, but barely. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. Her fingers twitched as if reaching for the sword she could no longer hold. Sarah crouched beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her throat. She said the woman's mana channels were almost completely empty. She said that for a mage knight, this was like having no blood. The body could survive for a time on residual energy, but eventually the organs that depended on mana to function would fail. Heart first, then lungs. This woman was dying. She had days at most. Noah looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the herb satchel she was already carrying. She said she could prepare a concentrated mana infusion from the healing herbs, stronger than the tea he had been giving the villagers. It might stabilize the knight long enough for her body to begin recovering if they could also get mana grain into her. Noah told her to do it. They carried the knight to the meeting hall. Leon cleared a space. Sarah worked with swift, practiced hands. She selected specific leaves from the harvest. She crushed them in combinations Noah would not have thought of. She added stems to some preparations and removed them from others. She heated water to a precise temperature and brewed 3 separate infusions, mixing them in a sequence that she explained targeted different mana channels in the body. This was not the crude leaf tea Noah had been making. This was medicine. Real, sophisticated, deeply knowledgeable medicine. The final preparation glowed silver, with a clarity that the simple tea had never achieved. Sarah lifted the knight's head and held the cup to her lips. The liquid went in slowly. The knight's throat moved. Once. Twice. Her breathing changed, deepened. The gray in her skin receded a shade. Sarah sat back and said they would need to dose her every 4 hours through the night. Noah said he would stay. Lien said she would stay too. Sarah looked at them both and said nothing, but something in her expression softened. The night woke at dawn. Her eyes opened, and they were amber and fierce and confused. She tried to sit up and failed. She tried again and made it halfway before Noah put a hand on her shoulder and told her to rest. She looked at his hand on her shoulder with an expression that suggested the last person who had touched her without permission had regretted it. But she did not move. She was too weak. She asked where she was. Noah told her. Norok, a village in the eastern provinces. She said she did not know it. He said most people did not. She asked why she was alive. Sarah told her about the mana herb infusion. The knight looked at Sarah, and then at Noah, and then around the room. Her gaze stopped on the window. Through it, she could see the eastern field, the rows of luminous mana grain glowing in the early light. She stared. Her jaw tightened. She asked if those were mana crops. Noah said yes. She said that was impossible. He said he had been hearing that a lot lately. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said her name was Karen. She said she was a mage knight of the Silver Order, or she had been. The Silver Order had disbanded 2 years ago when their mana reserves ran dry and their contract with the regional guild was terminated because Graven decided knights without mana were not worth paying. She said she had been wandering since then, selling her sword for food, watching her mana reserves drain month by month, watching her skills fade. The spells she could once cast without thinking now sputtered and died before they formed. She had come east because someone said there was work guarding a merchant caravan. The caravan never showed. She had kept walking, and then her body gave out. She said all of this in a flat, controlled voice that did not invite sympathy. Noah offered her mana grain. She took it, ate it slowly. Her eyes changed as the mana entered her system. That same look Doran had shown. The recognition of something long absent returning. She flexed her hand. A faint shimmer appeared around her fingers. Just for a moment. A ghost of what had once been power. She looked at the shimmer, and her jaw clenched, and she closed her fist, and the shimmer vanished. She looked at Noah. She asked what he wanted. He said he needed someone who could fight. She asked why a farmer needed a fighter. He told her about Graven, about the guilds, about the refugees streaming in and the certainty that sooner or later someone would come to take what they had built. Karen listened without expression. Then she said she would make him a deal. She would guard his fields and his people. In exchange, she wanted mana grain and healing herbs in sufficient quantity to restore her combat reserves. She said she would not pretend it was charity. She was a knight who needed mana, and he was a farmer who had it. Fair trade. Noah agreed. They shook hands. Her grip was weak, but her eyes were not. He could see the ember of something burning behind them. Something that had almost gone out, but had not quite managed to die. Pride, perhaps, or purpose. Or just the simple, stubborn refusal to fade away quietly that characterized people who had been forged in fire. He had seen it in farmers back home. The ones who lost everything to a flood or a drought, and came back the next season and planted again. The ones who did not know how to stop. Karen had that look. She would heal. She would grow strong again. And when Graven came, she would be standing between him and the fields that Noah had brought back from the dead. The system pulsed in the corner of his vision. Community defense initiated. Farm security, low but growing. Mannonite allied. He dismissed the notification. He had work to do. The southern field was only half restored. The western field had not been touched, and 67 households needed to eat tomorrow. He walked back to the fields. Behind him, Karen was already standing, leaning on the wall, looking out at the manna grain with that ember burning in her eyes. Sarah was organizing her new herb preparation station in the corner of the meeting hall. Lian was updating her ledger. Miru was running between the grain rows with a watering bucket too heavy for him, sloshing water on his feet. Garen was shouting at someone about compost ratios. Norok was alive. It was messy and fragile and held together by thin threads of trust and grain and healing tea. But it was alive, and it was growing. Just like his crops, one seed at a time. The old man arrived on the 21st day. He came not from the road, but from the hills to the north, riding a mule so thin its ribs showed through matted fur. He wore a long coat that had once been fine wool and was now a patchwork of repairs. His beard was white and unkempt. His back was bent. But his eyes were sharp, and they swept across the eastern field with a precision that reminded Noah of Sarah examining her herbs. He dismounted at the field's edge and stood there for a long time. Then he knelt and pressed both hands flat to the restored soil and stayed like that for nearly a minute. When he stood, his face had changed. The sharpness in his eyes had been replaced by something between wonder and grief. He walked into the field without asking. Garen moved to stop him, but Lian held up a hand. She had seen the remnant of a crest on his coat, a sheaf of grain crossed with a staff. The old man found Noah in the herbs section, where he was planting a new crop the system had unlocked. Manna clover, a ground cover that fixed manna into the soil the way legumes fixed nitrogen. Not food, but infrastructure. The living foundation that would make every subsequent crop stronger. The old man watched Noah plant the clover with naked disbelief on his face. He said that what Noah was doing was called manna rotation. He said it had been theorized by the Royal Agricultural College 40 years ago and never implemented because no one could produce enough manna crop varieties to make the cycle work. He said watching a manna-fixing cover crop go into soil that had been dead 3 weeks ago was like watching a myth walk out of a textbook. He introduced himself as Born, former royal agronomist, former head of the Crown's manna crop research division. He emphasized the word former. He said the Crown had dismissed him 4 years ago when the Withering entered its second year and his research failed to produce results. He had understood what the soil needed, but lacked the ability to provide it. No one could restore manna to dead earth. He had spent 4 years wandering the dying farmlands, watching his life's work turn to dust. Then, a refugee on the northern road told him about Norok. He had not believed it. He came anyway. Noah showed him everything. The eastern field in its third cycle. The southern field half restored. The western field freshly broken. The irrigation network running from the well through branching channels to every section. The compost system processing every scrap of organic waste. Sarah's herb station. The manna clover enriching soil between crop rows. Bourne walked through it in silence, touching plants and crumbling soil between his fingers. When the tour ended, he sat on an overturned bucket and said that Noah was making mistakes. The irrigation channels were too shallow, losing water to evaporation. The compost ratios had too much ash and not enough green material, throwing off decomposition. The grain spacing was 10% too tight, and the plants were competing for light. The herb section needed wind breaks because wind was causing micro damage that reduced mana potency. He said all of this with the urgent precision of an expert who had finally found something worth his expertise. Noa listened to every word. He asked Born to stay. Born said he had nowhere else to go. That was not what Noa asked. He asked again. Born looked at the fields and said yes. Within 2 days, Born had redesigned the irrigation. Deeper channels with covered sections, branching distribution points, a gravity-fed system using the slope of the southern field. He adjusted the compost formula, adding crushed mana grain husks and herb stems in layers that decomposed faster. He widened grain spacing and built windbreaks from bundled dead stalks. Every change produced visible results. The crops responded. The soil darkened. The yields climbed. On his third evening, Born sat with Noa at the edge of the western field and said something that changed everything. He said the withering was wrong. Not morally, scientifically. Mana was generated deep in the earth and rose through geological layers into topsoil where plants absorbed it. For mana to vanish completely, something had to be interrupting that flow, blocking it or diverting it. Droughts could reduce mana flow. Over-farming could deplete reserves. But complete cessation across an entire kingdom for 5 years was not consistent with any natural process he knew. He had written papers about this and presented them to the crown and been dismissed. He looked at Noah's restored soil and said that what Noah did should not work either. Restoring mana to topsoil without a functioning deep source was like filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom. The mana should drain away as fast as it was added, but it was not draining. The restored patches held their mana. Something was sealing the soil from below, or something was providing a new source. Born did not know which. But he said that both possibilities pointed to the same conclusion. The withering was not natural, and neither was Noah's ability to reverse it. They were two sides of the same phenomenon. One force pulling mana out of the world, another force pushing it back in. Noah sat with that for a long time after Born went to sleep. He looked at the system interface glowing in the corner of his vision. He thought about the quest descriptions, the way the system talked about restoring land and feeding people, as if these were not just tasks, but imperatives, as if the system itself had a purpose beyond helping one farmer grow crops. He thought about Born's words. 2 forces, one draining, one restoring. He was the restoring force, which meant somewhere out there was the draining force, and it was winning. 5 years of withering against 3 weeks of one farmer on one dead field. The math was not in his favor, but the math never was. He went back to work the next morning and planted mana clover across every gap between his crop rows, and for the first time, he felt like he was not just growing food. He was fighting a war. And the battlefield was the soil itself. On the 25th day, the guild came. Not Graven himself. He sent a clerk. A thin man in a blue coat with the guild crest on his chest, and 2 armed escorts who looked bored and underfed. The clerk rode into Norok on a horse that was better fed than any person in the village, and stopped at the edge of the eastern field and stared at the glowing crops with an expression that shifted from disbelief to calculation in the space of 3 breaths. He dismounted and asked to speak with whoever was in charge. Lien intercepted him before he reached the field. She asked his business. He said he was here on behalf of Magistrate Graven of the Eastern Regional Guild. He said the guild had received reports of unauthorized mana crop cultivation in the Norok district. He said that under the Emergency Mana Regulation Act, passed in the 2nd year of the Withering, all mana crop production required guild licensing, and all mana harvests were subject to guild taxation at a rate of 60%. He said this with the practiced smoothness of a man who had delivered bad news so many times it no longer felt like news to him. Lien told him there was no guild license because they had never been offered one. The clerk said that was not his concern. He said the guild required immediate registration of all mana-producing land and an inventory of current and projected yields. He said a taxation officer would be dispatched within 10 days to assess the first payment. He said failure to comply would result in seizure of all mana crops and land under guild authority. He smiled when he said this, a professional smile that did not reach his eyes. Noah had been listening from 20 paces away. He walked over. The clerk looked at him, looked at the dirt on his hands and the rough cloth he wore, and dismissed him in the way that well-dressed men dismiss farmers everywhere in every world. Noah asked what the guild offered in exchange for 60% of their harvest. The clerk blinked. He said the guild offered legal protection and market access. Noah asked what legal protection meant when the guild had let every village in the eastern provinces starve for 5 years. The clerk's smile thinned. He said those were policy decisions above his authority. Noah asked what market access meant when there was no market because everyone who might buy grain was dead or dying. The clerk stopped smiling entirely. He said it did not matter what was offered. The law was the law. 60% or seizure. Those were the options. Karen appeared behind Noah. She had been training in the southern field every morning since her mana reserves began recovering. 3 weeks of mana grain and healing herbs had transformed her. She was still thin, but the gray was gone from her skin. She moved with the controlled economy of someone whose body remembered what it was built for. She wore her battered armor, and her sword hung at her hip, and there was a shimmer around her hands that had not been there when she arrived. Mana returning to her channels. Not full strength, not close, but enough to notice. The clerk's escorts noticed. Their boredom evaporated. One of them put a hand on his weapon. Karen did not draw her sword. She did not need to. She simply stood behind Noah and looked at the clerk, and the clerk looked at her and recognized what she was. A mage knight with mana in her channels was a different creature from a mage knight without. He swallowed. He said he would report back to Magistrate Graven. He said the magistrate would make a determination. He mounted his horse and left, with his escorts riding faster than they had arrived. Noah watched them go. He looked at Karen. She said that bought them 10 days at most. Graven would not send a clerk next time. He would come himself. Or he would send guild mages. Noah asked how many mages the regional guild had. Karen said 30 at full strength. But full strength was the problem. Most guild mages were depleted like everyone else. The Withering did not spare them just because they wore blue coats. She estimated maybe 8 to 10 with enough mana reserves to be dangerous. Against one mage knight still recovering her strength, those were not good odds. Noah looked at the fields. 70 households depending on this harvest. More refugees arriving every few days. Sarah's healing station treating a dozen patients daily. Bourne's improvements increasing yields week by week. All of it could be taken. All of it could end. He called a meeting that evening. The first real meeting of what Norok had become. Not a dying village anymore, but a settlement of nearly 300 people. They gathered in the open space between the meeting hall and the eastern field, because there was no building large enough to hold them all. Noah stood on an overturned cart and spoke. He told them what the guild clerk had said. 60% or seizure. He told them what it meant. More than half their food and healing herbs taken by the same people who had let them starve. He told them what he thought they should do. Refuse. The crowd was silent. Then Garen spoke. He said refusing the guild was suicide. He said Graven had mages and soldiers and the law on his side. Noah said Graven had the law of a kingdom that had abandoned its people. A woman from Ashfen stood up. She said her village had paid guild taxes until there was nothing left, and the guild had not sent a single grain of food when her children were dying. She said she would rather fight than pay. A man from another refugee group said the same. Then another. Then another. The voices grew louder and angrier, and Noah let them speak. When the noise subsided, he said they were not going to fight. Not yet. He said they were going to grow. He said the best defense was not a wall or a sword. It was a harvest so large and so essential that destroying it would be an act of self-destruction for anyone who tried. He said he was going to restore every dead field around Norok. Every one. He said he was going to make this settlement the only source of mana crops in the eastern provinces. And then, Graven could come with his mages and his laws, and he would have to choose between taking the harvest and killing the only person who could make the next one grow. Bourne stood up beside him. He said Noah was right. He said that in a world without mana, the person who controlled the source controlled everything. But control through dependency was a blade that cut both ways. If they made themselves indispensable, they could not be destroyed. But they could still be enslaved. The distinction mattered. Noa nodded. He said they would not be enslaved either. He said they had 10 days. He asked who was willing to work. Every hand in the crowd went up. 10 days of the hardest work Norok had ever seen. Noa pushed the system to its limits. Soil restoration from first light to last. 5 meters every 45 minutes. His body running on mana grain and willpower, and the steady knowledge that the clock was ticking. Bourne directed the expansion with military precision. The western field was mapped and divided into sections. Restoration crews followed Noah's path, preparing the freshly treated soil for planting. Irrigation channels extended from the existing network into new territory. Compost was produced in volumes that would have seemed absurd 3 weeks ago. Every scrap of organic material processed and returned to the earth. Sarah trained 4 village women in basic herb preparation. Not her full art, that took years, but enough to brew healing tea and dress wounds and treat the most common ailments. She needed to free herself from routine work, because Noah had given her a different task. He had unlocked a new tier of seeds. Intermediate mana crops unlocked. New seeds, high mana grain. Growth time, 5 days. Yield, triple basic grain. Mana content, significant. Mana restoration herb. Growth time, 10 days. Properties, restores mage-level mana reserves. High mana grain was a leap forward. Triple the yield and significantly more mana per kernel. But it was the restoration herb that changed the game. A plant that could restore mana to mages. Not the faint trickle that basic herbs provided. Real restoration. Enough to refill depleted channels and return combat capability to people who had lost it. Sarah examined the first restoration herb seedlings with trembling hands. She said this was impossible. She said the closest equivalent in pre-withering pharmacology was a preparation called the Crown's Reserve. It had been made from 7 rare herbs grown in the royal greenhouses and given only to the kingdom's most elite mage knights. A single dose cost more than a common soldier earned in a year. Noah was growing something comparable in a field that had been dead dust a month ago. She said if Graven learned about this, he would not send a clerk or even guild mages. He would come with an army. Noah said Graven could not afford an army. The Withering had weakened the guilds along with everyone else. Sarah said he was underestimating what desperate, powerful people would do when they saw something they wanted. Noah said he was not underestimating anything. He was planting. Karen trained every day. The mana grain and basic healing herbs had brought her to perhaps 30% of her former strength. Enough to hold a mana blade steady. Enough to cast a basic barrier that could stop an arrow. Not enough to fight 10 guild mages. But on the 6th day, Noah gave her the first harvested restoration herb. Sarah prepared it in a concentrated form. Karen drank it and went rigid. Her eyes blazed amber. The air around her shimmered and cracked. Mana flooded her channels with an intensity she had not felt in 3 years. She drew her sword and the blade ignited with white light. She swung once and the air split. A visible arc of mana energy crossed the field and struck a dead tree 200 paces away. The tree exploded into splinters. Karen stood, breathing hard, with light still crawling across her armor. She looked at the sword in her hand. She looked at Noah. She said that 1 dose had taken her to 60%. Another would bring her to 80. 2 more and she would be at full combat strength. She said at full strength she could hold a defensive line against 10 depleted guild mages by herself. She said this without boasting. It was a tactical assessment delivered in the flat voice of a professional. Noah gave her another dose the next day. The transformation continued. Color returned to her face. Muscle filled out along her frame. She moved faster, hit harder. The shimmer around her hands became a constant presence. She began patrolling the perimeter of the settlement every morning before dawn. The refugees saw her walking the fields with her glowing sword, and the word spread through the camp. They had a knight, a real one, with real mana. The morale effect was worth more than any weapon. On the 8th day, 3 more fighters arrived. Not mage knights, soldiers. Common infantry who had deserted their posts when their garrisons ran out of food and mana. 2 men and a woman, thin and haggard and ashamed of what they had become. Karen assessed them. Their armor was rusted and their weapons were dull, but their training was intact. She put them on mana grain and basic herbs and set them to drilling in the southern field every afternoon. They responded like dying plants given water, standing straighter each day, moving with purpose, remembering what they had been before the withering took everything. By the 9th day, Noah had restored 80% of the western field and 40% of the northern field. The settlement's total cultivated area had tripled. High mana grain grew in dense golden rows that cast light visible from half a league away. Root vegetables and basic grain fed the growing population. Healing herbs kept them healthy. Restoration herbs were stockpiled for Karen and the 3 soldiers. Bourne calculated the projected yield for the next harvest cycle. He presented the numbers to Noah and Lien that evening. At current growth rates, Norok would produce more mana grain in a single cycle than the entire Eastern Regional Guild had in storage. More healing herbs than the provincial capital's hospital had used in the last 2 years. And if the restoration herbs reached maturity, the settlement would possess the ability to rearm mage knights at a rate the kingdom had not seen since before the withering. These numbers were power. Not the power of swords or spells. The power of a full granary in a starving world. On the 10th morning, Noah stood at the center of his fields and looked at what they had built. 4 fields, hundreds of rows, thousands of plants glowing with mana in soil that had been dead a month ago. 300 people working and eating and healing and living. A knight restored to fighting strength. 3 soldiers recovering. A healer with medicine no one else could make. An agronomist whose expertise was multiplying every seed Noah planted. It was not enough. It would never be enough until every dead field in Arkan was alive again. But it was enough for today. It was enough for what was coming. Lien appeared beside him. She said riders had been spotted on the western road. 6 of them, wearing blue coats. Noah nodded. He said it was time to meet Magistrate Graven. Graven rode at the front of his column. 6 riders in blue coats with guild crests polished to a shine that looked obscene against the dead gray landscape they crossed. The magistrate was a tall man, with silver hair cut close to his skull and a face built for authority. He wore his coat like armor. His horse was the healthiest animal Noah had seen in this world, well-fed and groomed, and radiating the kind of care that required resources no common person had access to during the withering. That horse told Noah everything he needed to know about the man riding it. Graven crested the low rise east of Norok and stopped. His 5 companions stopped with him. They sat their horses in a line on the ridge and looked down at the settlement, and for a long moment nobody moved. Noah understood why. From the ridge the view was staggering. 4 fields of mana crops glowing gold and green and silver against the dead gray earth surrounding them. An oasis of light in a world of ash. Irrigation channels catching the sun. People moving through the rows. Smoke rising from cooking fires fueled by proper food. The contrast between Norok and the barren wasteland around it was so sharp it looked painted. Graven stared for nearly a full minute. Then he kicked his horse forward and rode down. Noah met him at the village edge. Lien stood to his right. Karen to his left, in full armor, with her sword at her hip and mana shimmering around her gauntlets. Bourne stood behind them. Garen and a group of the strongest villagers formed a loose semicircle at their backs. Not a wall, not a threat. Just a presence. A reminder that this was not one man alone. Graven dismounted. His 5 companions remained mounted. Noah noted that 3 of them had staves strapped to their backs. Mages. Their faces had the same gray undertone he had seen on every mana-depleted person in Arkan. Even guild mages were starving. Graven was not. His skin was healthy. His frame was full. He had mana reserves. That meant he had been hoarding while his own people suffered alongside everyone else. The magistrate walked toward Noah and stopped 3 paces away. He looked at Noah's dirt-stained hands and rough clothing. He looked at the fields behind him. He said he had come to see the miracle for himself. His voice carried the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. He said his clerk had reported unauthorized manna crop cultivation on unlicensed land, and he had not believed a word of it until now. He looked at the eastern field, at the high manna grain glowing gold in its rows. He said it was impressive. He said he had not seen manna grain of this quality since the second year of the withering. He asked who Noah's agricultural mage was. Noah said he did not have one. Graven looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, measuring, reassessing. He said that manna crops did not grow on dead soil without an agricultural mage. Noah said they did if you knew how to farm. Graven's expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A recalculation. He said that regardless of method, the law was clear. All manna crop production required guild licensing and was subject to guild taxation. He said the rate was 60% of total yield, payable in kind. He said this was not negotiable. Noah asked what the guild had done for Norok in the 5 years of the withering. Graven said that was irrelevant. Noah said it was entirely relevant. He said the guild had collected taxes from this village for decades, and when the withering came and the people needed help, the guild sent nothing. No grain, no herbs, no mages, nothing. He said 6 people had died last month alone. He said the guild had let them die. Graven's jaw tightened. He said the guild's resources were limited, and allocation decisions were made at the regional level based on strategic priorities. Noah said that strategic priorities was a polite way of saying the guild fed itself first and let the rest starve. The silence that followed had weight. Graven's eyes went cold. He said that Noah was a farmer and should speak like one. He said the guild governed mana resources in this region by royal charter, and its authority was not subject to debate by peasants. He said Noah had 2 choices: register the land and pay the tax, or have it seized. He said there was no third option. Karen stepped forward. The mana around her hands intensified. She said there was always a third option. Graven looked at her. He recognized what she was. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the shimmer around her gauntlets, and Noah saw the calculation happening in real time. A mage knight with active mana channels. In the 5th year of the withering, that meant someone had restored her reserves. His gaze snapped back to Noah, and for the first time there was something other than contempt in it. There was hunger. He asked what Noah had given the knight. Noah said nothing. Graven looked at the herbs section of the eastern field. At the silver-green healing herbs and the new deeper green restoration herbs growing in their dedicated rows. His eyes widened slightly. He knew what restoration herbs were. He knew what they were worth. Noah watched the hunger in Graven's eyes deepen into something that looked almost like pain. The magistrate was staring at the one thing in the world that could save his guild. His mages were depleted. His power base was crumbling because power in Arkan meant mana, and mana was gone. Except here. Except on this impossible farm run by a dirt-handed peasant who should not exist. Graven mastered himself. The hunger disappeared behind a mask of authority. He said he would return in 3 days with the full terms of guild registration. He said cooperation would be rewarded. He said resistance would not. He mounted his horse. His 5 companions formed around him. As they rode back up the ridge, one of the mages turned and looked at the fields, and the expression on his gray depleted face was not hostility. It was longing. They disappeared over the rise. Noah exhaled. Lien said that went better than she expected. Born said it went exactly as he expected. Graven had come to seize, and instead he had retreated to reassess because the situation was bigger than he had anticipated. Restoration herbs changed the calculation entirely. This was no longer about taxing a small farm. This was about controlling the only source of mage-level mana restoration in the eastern provinces. Maybe in the kingdom. Born said Graven would not come with terms in 3 days. He would come with a plan. Karen said she agreed. She said the look in Graven's eyes when he saw the restoration herbs was the look of a man who had just found a gold mine and was deciding whether to buy it or take it by force. Noah looked at his fields. He said they had 3 days. He said he needed them to be the most productive 3 days this farm had ever seen. He walked into the western field and knelt and pressed his hands to the earth and kept working. Noah did not sleep for those 3 days. He pushed the system harder than he had ever pushed it. Restoration pulses every 45 minutes, from dawn until his vision blurred and his hands shook, and Lien forced him to eat. He unlocked a new system level on the second night. Soil Restoration Level 3, range 8 meters, cooldown 30 minutes. Advanced mana crops available. The expanded range and shortened cooldown changed his mathematics overnight. 8 meters every 30 minutes meant he could restore ground twice as fast. He threw himself at the northern field, the last untouched section of farmland around Norok. By the morning of the third day, it was half restored and planted with high mana grain. The settlement's cultivated area now covered every field within the original village boundaries. From the ridge where Graven had stopped 3 days ago, Norok looked like a green star burning in a dead gray sky. Sarah worked through the nights preparing stockpiles, healing herbs processed into concentrated doses, restoration herbs dried and preserved for maximum potency. She taught Lien and 2 other women the preparation methods so that if anything happened to her, the knowledge would survive. Bourne mapped every field and calculated sustainable yield projections. He said that at current production levels, Norok could feed 1,000 people and provide mana restoration to 50 mages continuously. Those numbers made Noah's stomach tighten, because numbers like that attracted attention far beyond a regional guild magistrate. Karen drilled the 3 soldiers daily. Their mana reserves were climbing. Not enough for combat magic, but enough to enhance their physical abilities. Faster reflexes, greater strength. A soldier enhanced by even low-level mana was worth 3 ordinary fighters. With Karen at full strength and 3 enhanced soldiers, the settlement had a small but real defensive capability. On the evening of the second day, a 4th mage knight arrived. A young man, barely 20 years old, with haunted eyes and a mana blade that flickered like a candle in the wind. He said his name was Torin, and he had been a squire in the Silver Order when it disbanded. He had been wandering the eastern provinces, selling his failing abilities for scraps. He had heard about Norok from a refugee on the road. He had come for the restoration herbs because he was dying. His mana channels were collapsing. Without restoration, he had weeks. Sarah examined him and confirmed it. His channels were degrading in a way she had seen before, in mages who went too long without mana. Irreversible, if not treated soon. Noah gave him a restoration dose that night. The young knight gasped, and light flooded his channels, and the flickering mana blade in his hand steadied into a solid beam. He wept. He could not help it. 3 years of fading power reversed in a single dose. He knelt in the dirt of the eastern field and put his forehead to the ground and said he would serve Norok until his last breath. Karen pulled him to his feet and told him to stop being dramatic and start training. He did. Graven came on the 3rd morning. He did not bring 6 riders. He brought 20. 12 guild mages in blue coats with staves drawn and mana flickering at their tips. 8 armed soldiers in guild livery with crossbows and swords. Graven rode at the center on his well-fed horse, wearing a coat that had been replaced with something finer, ceremonial. He was making a statement. This was not a negotiation. It was a show of force. They formed a line on the ridge and looked down at Norok. But the view had changed. 3 days ago, the settlement had 4 fields of crops and 300 people. Now it had 4 fields fully cultivated and nearly 400 people, and a perimeter marked by patrol routes and watchtowers built from scavenged timber. Karen stood at the village edge in full armor, with her sword drawn and mana blazing white around her entire body. Not just her hands, her whole body, full combat manifestation. Beside her stood Torin, with his mana blade solid and bright. The 3 enhanced soldiers flanked them in formation. Behind them, the villagers of Norok stood in rows, not armed, not threatening, just standing. 400 people who had been dying a month ago, now fed and healed and standing on their feet in the light of fields that should not exist. Graven descended the ridge. This time he did not dismount. He sat his horse and looked at Karen's blazing mana and Torin's steady blade, and the 400 people and the fields stretching in every direction, and Noah standing in front of all of it with dirt on his hands and nothing on his face that looked like fear. The magistrate spoke. He said he was prepared to offer terms. He said the guild would accept 30% taxation in exchange for official recognition of Norok as a licensed mana production zone under guild protection. He said guild mages would be stationed in the settlement to ensure proper management of resources. He said the restoration herbs would be classified as strategic materials and placed under direct guild control. He said this was generous. Noa said no. Graven's face did not move. He asked Noa to repeat himself. Noa said no. He said the guild would not control the restoration herbs. He said guild mages would not be stationed in Norok. He said 30% was still 30% of a harvest grown by people the guild had abandoned. He said he would offer the guild a trade agreement, mana grain and healing herbs at fair prices, restoration herbs available to guild mages who came to Norok for treatment. No taxation, no seizure, no guild control over land or production. A partnership between equals or nothing. Graven said that a farmer and a guild magistrate were not equals. Noa said they were when the farmer was the only person in the kingdom who could make dead soil grow. The silence stretched. Graven looked at his 12 mages. He looked at Karen blazing with mana. He looked at the fields. Born had predicted this moment. He had told Noa that Graven would calculate the cost of a fight and the cost of a deal, and choose whichever preserved more of his power. The fight would cost him mages he could not replace. Even if he won and took the fields, the crops would die without Noah's restoration ability. He would gain one harvest and lose every harvest after it. The deal Noa offered gave him access to mana he desperately needed without the risk. But it also meant admitting that a peasant farmer held leverage over the most powerful institution in the province. Graven could not accept that. Not publicly, not in front of his mages. He said he would consider the terms. He turned his horse. His column followed. They rode back over the ridge and disappeared. Karen let her mana manifestation drop and staggered. Maintaining full combat display for that long had drained her significantly. Torin caught her arm. She pushed him off and sat down heavily on a fence post. She said Graven would not accept. She said his pride would not let him. Born disagreed. He said pride was expensive and Graven was running out of currency. Lien said it did not matter whether Graven accepted or refused. What mattered was that 400 people had eaten today and would eat tomorrow. Noa looked at her. She was right. That was all that mattered. Everything else was politics. He went back to the fields and knelt in the warm, living soil and planted the next row of seeds. Graven's answer came not in words, but in fire. On the 29th night, a patrol soldier spotted torches moving through the darkness beyond the northern field. Karen was on her feet before the alarm finished sounding. She climbed the watchtower and counted. 30 figures approaching from 3 directions. Guild mages and hired mercenaries splitting into groups to hit the fields simultaneously. Graven had chosen force. Karen woke Torn and the 3 soldiers and positioned them at the narrowest approaches between the fields. She told Noa to stay behind the meeting hall. He refused. He walked to the center of the eastern field and stood among his crops. If they wanted to burn the fields, they would have to go through him. The first group hit the northern perimeter, 6 mercenaries with torches. They made it 10 steps into the restored soil before Torin met them. His mana blade carved an arc of light through the darkness, and the lead mercenary's torch went spinning into the irrigation ditch, where it hissed and died. The mercenaries hesitated. They had been told the settlement had 1 half-recovered knight. Nobody had mentioned a second. Torin pressed forward. He was young and scared, and burning through mana faster than he should, but his blade was steady and his training held. The mercenaries fell back. On the western side, Karen met the main force. 12 guild mages led by Graven's deputy, a woman named Hesra, who Karen recognized from the old days. Hesra had been a middling combat mage before the Withering. Now she was depleted to perhaps 20%. Her staff flickered with weak blue fire. She told Karen to stand aside. Karen said nothing. She raised her sword and white mana poured off it like water. Hesra looked at that blade and understood what restoration herbs had done. She attacked anyway. Professional obligation, or fear of Graven, or simply the momentum of a decision already made. Her 12 mages sent a volley of mana bolts toward the field. Karen's barrier caught them. The bolts splashed against white light and dissolved. Karen counterattacked. A single horizontal slash that sent a wave of cutting energy across the ground. It struck no one. She aimed it at the dirt in front of the mages. A warning. The earth erupted in a line, and the mages stumbled backward. 2 of them dropped their staves. Hesra looked at the furrow Karen had carved in the dead earth outside the field boundary. She looked at Karen, standing untouched, with mana blazing around her. She lowered her staff. The other mages followed. They were depleted and starving, and fighting for a man who fed his horse better than his people. The fight went out of them like air from a punctured bladder. On the southern side, the third group never made it past the villagers. Garen had organized 100 people with farming tools and torches of their own. They stood in a line across the southern field's entrance. Not soldiers, farmers and refugees and mothers and old men, but 100 of them, shoulder to shoulder in the light of their own crops. The mercenaries took one look and turned around. It was over in less than an hour. No deaths. Hesra and her mages stood in the darkness outside the field boundary, with their staves lowered and nowhere to go. Karen offered them mana grain and healing herbs. 3 of them accepted on the spot. By morning, 7 of the 12 had defected. They sat in the meeting hall, eating the first real food they had tasted in months, while mana seeped back into their starving channels. They told Noa everything about Graven's operation, his stockpiles, his supply lines, his remaining forces, and something else, something that made Born go pale. They said Graven had been receiving shipments of concentrated mana from an unknown source for 2 years, not growing it, receiving it. Barrels of liquid mana delivered by unmarked wagons from the south. That was how he maintained his reserves while everyone else starved. That was how his horse stayed fat. Born pulled Noa aside and said this confirmed his theory. Someone was collecting the mana drained from the soil and distributing it to allies. The withering was not just unnatural, it was organized. Noa sent a message to Graven the next morning. Not a threat, an invitation. He offered the same terms as before. Fair trade. No taxation, no seizure. Access to restoration herbs for any guild mage who came peacefully. He added one condition. He wanted to know about the mana shipments. Graven did not respond for 2 days. When he came alone. No mages, no soldiers, no horse. He walked into Norok on foot, and he looked 10 years older than he had 3 days before. 7 of his mages were gone. His night attack had failed. His authority in the region was crumbling, because word had spread. The guild that was supposed to protect people had tried to burn the only food source in the province. He sat across from Noa in the meeting hall, and for the first time, there was no mask of authority on his face, just the exhausted features of a man whose power had been built on scarcity, and who had just discovered that scarcity was ending. Noa asked about the mana shipments. Graven was silent for a long time. Then he spoke. He said the shipments had begun in the 3rd year of the Withering. A representative had approached him. No name, no affiliation, just an offer. Concentrated liquid mana delivered monthly in exchange for cooperation. The cooperation was simple. Maintain the guild's monopoly on mana resources. Prevent any independent mana cultivation. Suppress any research into the cause of the Withering. Keep the population dependent on guild distribution. Graven said he had accepted because he was afraid. His mages were weakening. His authority was fading. The mana shipments were the only thing keeping the guild functional. He said he did not know where the mana came from. He said the wagons came from the south, and the representative met him once a season at a location outside the provincial capital. He said the representative was not a mage, or if he was, he hid it well. Born listened to this with his fists clenched on his knees. He said the pattern was clear. Whoever was draining mana from the earth was selling it back to the powerful in exchange for keeping the population helpless. The Withering was not just an attack on the land. It was a system of control. Drain the mana, create dependency. Distribute just enough to keep the elite loyal. Let everyone else die. And the guild magistrates were the distribution network. Graven said Born was right. He said he had known it from the beginning. He said knowing had not stopped him, because the alternative was watching his guild die. Noa looked at Graven and saw a man who had made a calculation and lost. Not evil, not good, just a man who chose survival over principle, and discovered that survival without principle was its own kind of death. Noa told Graven he would honor the trade agreement. Grain and herbs for the guild's remaining mages. Restoration treatments for those willing to come to Norok. In exchange, Graven would provide everything he knew about the mana shipments. Routes, schedules, any detail about the representative. Graven agreed. He had nothing left to bargain with. As he left the meeting hall, he stopped in the doorway and looked back at Noa. He said that Noa did not understand what he was walking into. He said the people behind the Withering had resources beyond anything a regional guild could imagine. He said they would come for Norok the moment they learned what Noa could do. Noa said they would find a farm. Graven shook his head and said they would find a threat. He walked out into the light of fields he had tried to burn, and his shoulders were hunched, and his stride was slow, and Noa watched him go and felt no triumph, only the weight of what came next. Bourne traced the shipment routes on a map scratched into a wooden board. Every delivery Graven described, every location, every schedule. The lines converged in the south, a region called the Ashvale Basin, once the most fertile mana-producing farmland in the kingdom, now a dead zone so thoroughly drained that even refugees avoided it. Bourne said that made sense. If you wanted to hide something, you hid it in the last place anyone would look. A place so dead that no one would bother going there. Noa looked at the map. He looked at the system interface. A new notification had appeared after Graven's confession. Hidden quest revealed. Find the source of the Withering. Trace the mana drain to its origin.
Reward: Legendary Soil Restoration. World Mana Network Access. The system was pointing him south, the same direction as the shipment routes. He told Lien he was leaving. She did not argue. She said she had known this was coming since the night the guild mages told them about the shipments. She said Norok would survive without him for a time. The fields were established. Bourne knew how to maintain them. Sarah could manage the healing operation. Garen and the new arrivals could handle labor. Karen would provide security. The systems Noa had built were designed to function without constant intervention. That was the whole point. A farm that needed one person to operate was not a farm. It was a dependency. Noa had built something that could stand on its own. He packed light. Mana grain for the road. Healing herbs. A small pouch of restoration herb concentrate that Sarah prepared. Seeds. Always seeds. The system held dozens of varieties now. He did not know what he would find in the south, but he knew that whatever it was, the answer would involve the soil. Karen insisted on coming. Noa said the settlement needed her. She said Torrin and the defected guild mages could hold Norok. 7 guild mages with restored mana reserves, plus Torrin, plus 3 enhanced soldiers. That was a garrison. Karen said her place was with Noa because whatever was in the south was not a farming problem. It was a combat problem. Bourne also insisted. He said he had spent his career studying mana ecology, and if the source of the Withering was in the Ashvale Basin, he needed to see it with his own eyes. Noa agreed to both. The 3 of them left on the 35th day. Lien walked them to the edge of the northern field. She looked at Noa and said nothing for a moment. Then she told him to come back. She said these fields needed their farmer. He said he would. She turned and walked back toward the settlement and did not look behind her. They traveled south for 4 days through dead country. Gray earth and silence and the occasional ruin of a village long abandoned. Karen's mana kept them safe from the creatures that roamed the wasteland. Twice they encountered monsters, twisted things that fed on residual mana in the dead soil. Karen destroyed them with efficient brutality. Bourne studied the soil at every stop. He took samples, measured mana levels with techniques Noa did not understand. The readings got worse as they moved south. Not just 0 mana, negative. The soil was not simply drained, it was being actively pulled. Mana was flowing downward and southward through the geological layers, like water running toward a drain. Bourne said they were getting close. On the 5th day, they reached the edge of the Ashvale Basin, and Noa felt it. A pulling sensation in his chest. The system flared red. Warning: extreme mana drain detected. Host mana reserves under threat. He pressed forward. The basin opened before them. A vast depression in the landscape, miles across. And at its center, something that should not have existed. A structure. Massive. Dark. Built from stone that absorbed light. It pulsed with a deep violet glow that Noa could feel in his teeth. Bourne stopped walking and stared. He said it was a mana siphon, an ancient device described in texts so old they were considered mythology. It drew mana from the earth through deep geological channels and concentrated it. The structure was enormous. It could drain an entire kingdom. It was draining an entire kingdom. The withering was not a mystery. It was a machine. They descended into the basin at dawn. The pulling sensation grew stronger with every step. Noah felt his own mana reserves draining. The faint energy he had accumulated from weeks of eating mana grain was being siphoned away. Karen felt it too. Her mana manifestation flickered and dimmed. She set her jaw and kept walking, but her hand stayed on her sword. Born was the least affected. He had almost no mana reserves to drain, the advantage of being ordinary. The structure grew larger as they approached. It was not one building, but a complex. Walls of dark stone surrounding a central tower that rose 200 feet from the basin floor. The violet glow emanated from the tower's peak. Channels had been carved into the ground, radiating outward from the base, like the roots of a vast tree. Mana flowed through them visibly, a dark liquid light running through stone veins toward the tower. Bourne said the channels extended for hundreds of miles underground. Every drop of mana drained from every field in Arkan flowed through this network into this single point. 5 years of a kingdom's life force concentrated in one structure. The entrance was unguarded. Noah found that more unsettling than any army. They walked through corridors of dark stone lit by that violet glow. The walls hummed with contained energy. Noah pressed his hand to the stone and the system reacted. Mana network detected. Siphon architecture identified. Countermeasure available at legendary restoration level. He was not at legendary level. Not yet. But the system was telling him the answer existed. He pressed deeper. At the center of the complex they found a chamber, vast and circular with the tower rising from its center. The tower was hollow. Inside it, mana spiraled upward in a column of dark light. Concentrated, compressed. More mana than Noah had ever sensed. More mana than the system had ever shown him. Around the base of the tower stood barrels, hundreds of them, the same barrels Graven had described, liquid mana being packaged and prepared for distribution. And beside the barrels stood people, workers in dark clothing filling and sealing and loading. An operation, a factory. This was not an ancient ruin left running by accident. Someone was maintaining it, feeding it, profiting from it. A voice spoke from above, calm and measured and entirely unsurprised. It said it had been wondering when the anomaly would come to investigate. Noah looked up. A figure stood on a balcony halfway up the tower's interior wall. A man in robes that shifted between dark violet and black. His face was middle-aged and unremarkable. His eyes were not. They glowed with the same violet light as the tower. He said his name did not matter. He said what mattered was the purpose. He said the mana of Arkan had been wild and wasted for centuries, spread thin across the soil, feeding peasants and minor mages and hedge witches and common crops. Inefficient, purposeless. He said the siphon collected and concentrated that wasted mana into something useful. Power. Real power. Enough to reshape the world. He said the withering was not a catastrophe. It was a harvest. The same word Noah used for his crops. A harvest. But instead of feeding people, this harvest starved them. Instead of restoring the land, it killed it. Noah looked at the man on the balcony and felt something cold settle in his chest. He asked what the concentrated mana was for. The man smiled. He said it was fuel. For what, he did not say. But he looked at the spiraling column of stolen mana with the expression of a man looking at a weapon. Karen's sword was already drawn. The man on the balcony raised a hand, and the chamber filled with violet light, and the pressure of concentrated mana slammed into them like a wall. Karen staggered. Bourne fell. Noah stood. The system blazed in his vision. Hostile mana field detected. Activating soil restoration protocol. Emergency level unlock. Legendary restoration. Authorized. The warmth that Noah knew so well. The warmth of his hands on the earth. The warmth that turned dead soil to living ground. It exploded outward from his body. Not into soil this time. Into the air. Into the stone. Into the mana network itself. The system was not just restoring Earth. It was restoring the flow. Reversing the siphon. The dark violet light in the chamber flickered. The column of stolen mana stuttered. The man on the balcony stopped smiling.
The restoration poured out of Noah like a river breaking through a dam. It flooded the mana channels carved into the stone floor and reversed their current. Dark violet light turned gold-green, the color of living soil, the color of mana grain glowing in a field that had been dead. The man on the balcony threw everything he had at Noah. Concentrated mana shaped into bolts and blades and crushing waves of force. Karen intercepted what she could. Her sword blazed white, and she cut through violet fire and deflected strikes that would have shattered walls. But she was weakening. The siphon drained her reserves even as she fought. She went to one knee. Then Noah's restoration wave reached her. Gold-green light washed over her body, and her mana channels flooded with fresh energy. Not the concentrated poison of the siphon. Clean mana. Living mana. The kind that rose from healthy soil and fed everything it touched. Karen surged to her feet. Her sword erupted with light brighter than anything the siphon chamber had ever seen. She leapt. The man on the balcony raised a barrier of violet mana. Karen's blade went through it like a plow through spring earth. The man stumbled backward. For the first time, fear crossed his face. Below him, Noah pressed deeper into the network. The system guided him. It showed him the architecture of the siphon, the channels running hundreds of miles through deep stone, the nodes where mana was pulled from the earth, the central column where it was concentrated and stored. It was a machine, and every machine could be turned off, or turned around. He pushed his restoration into the deepest channels, the ones that reached the farthest, the ones that touched the roots of the kingdom's geology. He felt the earth respond. Not the topsoil, the deep earth, the bedrock and the aquifers and the ancient mana springs that had fed Arkan for millennia. They were still there, capped and drained and suppressed, but alive, waiting. The way seeds wait in drought, patient and dormant and ready. He broke the caps, one by one. Every siphon node he reached, he reversed. Every channel he flooded with restoration energy. The effect was not subtle. The ground shook. The tower cracked. The column of stolen mana at its center destabilized as the flow reversed and clean mana surged upward through channels that had only known drainage for 5 years. The man in the violet robe screamed. Not in pain, in fury. He said Noah was releasing what had taken years to collect. He said the mana would dissipate back into the soil and be wasted again on peasants and weeds and worthless common life. He gathered the remaining concentrated mana in the chamber into his hands, a sphere of violet light dense enough to distort the air around it. He hurled it at Noah. Born stepped in front of it, the old agronomist who had no mana and no combat ability and no power of any kind except a lifetime of knowledge about how the earth worked. He stepped in front of the attack, and Noah's restoration wave caught him and wrapped around him, and the violet sphere struck the golden light and broke apart like a wave striking a cliff. Born stood in the dissipating energy with his white hair streaming and his old coat flapping, and wonder on his lined face. The restoration was not just in Noah anymore. It was in the network, in the channels, in the earth itself. It was self-sustaining. The deep springs were open. The mana was flowing upward for the first time in 5 years. Nothing could stop it now. The man on the balcony knew it. He looked at the crumbling tower and the reversing channels and the gold-green light flooding his domain, and he ran. A doorway at the back of the balcony, a passage leading somewhere deeper or farther or away. Karen moved to pursue. Noah called her back. It did not matter. The siphon was broken. The channels were reversed. The mana was returning to the earth. Let the man run. The kingdom would heal whether he liked it or not. They walked out of the complex as it collapsed behind them, stone walls crumbling as the energy that held them together was redirected back into the ground where it belonged. The Ashvale Basin shook and groaned, and then something extraordinary happened. The dead gray soil at Noah's feet shifted color, darkened. A crack appeared, and through it pushed a thread of green, then another, then 100. Then 1,000. Across the entire basin floor, the earth was waking up. Mana rising from the deep springs through healed channels into topsoil that had been dead for 5 years. Grass first, then small plants, Then the faint, luminous glow of wild mana flora that Born said had not been seen in Arkan since before the Withering. Born fell to his knees and pressed his hands to the living soil and wept. Karen sheathed her sword and stood in silence, watching the dead world turn green. The system pulsed one final notification. Quest complete. End the Withering. Mana network restored. Deep springs unsealed. Kingdom mana levels recovering. Estimated full restoration 2 years. Farmer system status. Purpose fulfilled. Remaining active for ongoing cultivation. 2 years. The earth would heal in 2 years. Not overnight, not by magic. By the slow, patient process of mana rising through stone and soil and root and leaf. The same way a field recovered after a long fallow. The same way life always came back when you gave it room. Noah started walking north, toward Norok, toward his fields. Toward Lien, standing at the edge of the northern field, waiting for a farmer to come home. Behind him, the Ashvale Basin was turning green. Ahead of him, a kingdom was waking up. And in his hands he carried seeds. Always seeds. Because that was what farmers did. They planted. And the world grew. Noah walked north for 3 days. The road that had been gray dust on the way south was changing. Not green yet. Not alive, but the dead chalk color had softened to something warmer. Brown. The brown of earth that remembers what moisture feels like. Born stopped every few hours to press his hands to the ground, and each time he stood up with a different expression. Awe. Then disbelief. Then something that looked like a man watching his faith proven right after decades of doubt. He said the deep mana was rising faster than he expected. The channels Noah had unsealed were not just open. They were pressurized. 5 years of blocked flow meant 5 years of accumulated force behind it. The mana was surging upward through the geological layers like a held breath finally released. He estimated that the eastern provinces would see the first effects within weeks, months at most. The rest of the kingdom would follow. Karen walked in silence. She had used more mana in the siphon chamber than she had possessed in 3 years combined. The restoration wave had refilled her, but something else had changed. She moved differently. Lighter, as if a weight she had carried so long she forgot it was there had been lifted. On the second night, she sat across from Noah at their small fire and said she owed him more than she could repay. Noah said she owed him nothing. She said that was exactly why she owed him. She said every powerful person she had ever served had kept a ledger. Favors given and favors owed. Debts tracked and collected. Noah grew food and healed people and asked for nothing, and that was the most terrifying kind of power she had ever encountered. She said it with a half-smile that Noah had never seen on her face before. They reached the outskirts of Norok's territory on the 3rd afternoon, and Noah stopped walking. Something was different. The fields beyond the settlement boundary. The ones he had never touched. The dead gray earth that surrounded his restored land like a sea around an island. It was not gray anymore. It was dark, soft, damp. He knelt and pressed his hands to it and felt what Born had been feeling for 3 days. Mana. Faint but present. Rising from below. The deep springs feeding up through healed channels into soil that had been dead for 5 years. His restored fields had been an island. Now the sea was filling in around them. He stood up and looked toward Norok and saw Lien running. She was running across the northern field toward him, with her hair loose and her ledger board abandoned somewhere behind her. And she was running the way people run when they have news too large to walk with. She reached him breathless and grabbed his arm and said he had to see. She pulled him to the western field's outer boundary. The line where his restored soil met the dead earth had always been sharp. Dark living ground on one side, gray death on the other. A border visible from 100 paces. The border was gone. The dark soil bled outward into the gray in a gradient that extended 50 paces beyond where Noah had ever worked. And in that gradient, in soil he had never touched and never restored and never planted, something was growing. Wild grass, Thin and fragile and not luminous, just green, ordinary green, the green of a world that does not need magic to be alive. Born fell to his knees for the second time in a week. He said the soil was healing itself. The restored deep channels were providing enough base mana for natural growth. Not mana crops, not magical agriculture, just life. Plain, ordinary, stubborn life pushing up through soil that had forgotten what it felt like to grow. Noah looked at the wild grass spreading beyond his fields and understood something that the system had been trying to tell him since the beginning. The point was never the mana crops. The mana grain and the healing herbs and the restoration plants were tools, means to an end. The end was this. Ordinary grass in ordinary soil. A world that could feed itself without a system or a siphon or a single farmer's magic hands. He was not supposed to be the source forever. He was supposed to start the process and let the earth finish it. Lien stood beside him looking at the grass with an expression he recognized from that first night when she saw the glowing sprout. But different. That night she had seen hope. Tonight she saw certainty. She said that people had been arriving all week. Not refugees this time. Representatives. A lord from the northern province whose lands were dying. A delegation of healers from the capital. A merchant consortium wanting to negotiate grain contracts. 2 more mage knights looking for restoration. And a sealed letter from the crown. She held it out. Noah looked at it. He did not open it. He put it in his pocket and walked into the western field and knelt among his crops and checked the soil moisture and the root development and the spacing between the mana clover and the grain rows. The letter could wait. The crops could not. Noah opened the crown's letter that evening. Lien read it aloud because the formal script was difficult for his eyes. The crown acknowledged the existence of Norok's mana production. The crown expressed interest in establishing a royal partnership. The crown invited the settlement's leader to the capital to discuss terms of cooperation in addressing the withering. The language was polite and careful and said nothing about the siphon or the violet-robed man or the organized system of mana theft that had been starving the kingdom for 5 years. Noah folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. He said he was not going to the capital. Born looked at him. Karen looked at him. Lien did not look at him because she already knew. She said that Norok needed him here. She said there were 600 people in the settlement now, and the outlying fields were expanding daily. And the new arrivals needed training in mana agriculture, and the compost systems needed scaling, and the irrigation network for the northern field was still not finished. She said all of this with the flat, practical tone of a woman who had been running a growing operation for 5 weeks and understood exactly what mattered and what did not. Noah nodded. He told Born to go in his place. Born stared at him. Noah said Born was a former royal agronomist who understood the science of mana ecology better than anyone alive. He said Born could explain what the siphon had been and what its destruction meant, and what the kingdom needed to do to support the natural restoration process. He said Born could tell the crown that Norok would share its knowledge freely. Seed varieties, cultivation techniques, soil restoration methods. Everything Noah had learned, and everything Born had refined. Not sold, not hoarded, shared. Because the whole point was that the earth should feed everyone, not just the people lucky enough to live near one farmer with a magic system. Born was quiet for a long time. Then he said he would go. He said he would tell them. He left the next morning on a horse provided by one of the visiting merchants. Noah watched him ride south toward the capital road and turned back to his fields. Spring was coming. The first real spring in 6 years. He could feel it in the soil. The mana levels were climbing daily. Not just in his restored fields, but in the ground beyond them. The wild grass had spread another 100 paces in every direction. Weeds were appearing. Actual weeds. Noah had never been happy to see weeds before, but these were proof that the soil biome was rebuilding. Where there were weeds, there would be insects. Where there were insects, there would be birds. Where there were birds, there would be seeds, carried on the wind to places Noah's hands would never reach. The system displayed his status one evening as he sat at the edge of the eastern field, watching the sun go down. Farmer system level, legendary. Soil restoration, maximum. Crop varieties available, 47. Total land restored, 12 square miles. Total people fed, 3,741. Kingdom mana recovery, 7% and rising. He dismissed the display. The numbers were satisfying, but they were not the point. The point was sitting behind him in the meeting hall. Sarah brewing medicine for a child with a fever. Karen teaching Torin a sword technique in the southern field, while the defected guild mages watched and pretended not to be impressed. Garen arguing with a merchant about grain prices. Miru showing a group of new arrivals how to check soil moisture with their fingers. The boy had become a real farmer's apprentice. Quick hands, good instincts. He would be better than Noah someday. Not because of a system, because he paid attention. Lien found Noah at the field's edge as the last light faded. She sat beside him. The mana grain glowed gold around them in the gathering dark. She said the Northern Lord wanted to hire Noah to restore his province's farmland. She said the healer delegation wanted to establish a permanent herb supply agreement. She said the merchant consortium was offering absurd amounts of gold for exclusive grain contracts. She said Noah would have to make decisions about all of this soon. He said he knew. She said she would help. He looked at her. She looked at the fields. The glow reflected in her eyes, and she was not the hard-drawn, exhausted woman he had met 5 weeks ago, standing at the edge of a dead field watching an impossible sprout. She was still hard, still practical, still the person who held everything together with ledger boards and fierce rationing, and the unwillingness to let anyone under her care go hungry. But the exhaustion was gone. In its place was something that looked like the future. She said there was one more thing. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small cloth pouch and handed it to him. Inside were seeds. Not system seeds. Real seeds. Collected from the wild grass growing beyond the field boundaries. Natural mana seeds produced by natural mana soil without any system intervention. The first generation of life that the healed earth had created on its own. Noah held them in his palm. They did not glow. They were small and brown and ordinary. They were the most beautiful things he had ever seen. He closed his hand around them and looked out at the fields of Norok, stretching gold and green and silver into the darkness. Behind them, a settlement of 600 people who had been dying and were now alive. Beyond them, a kingdom, slowly remembering what it felt like to grow. And in his hand, a fistful of seeds that the earth had made without him. He smiled. The first season was over. The soil was warm. There was planting to do.